The Green Party are fielding over 300 candidates at this year's general election.
Well, good morning everyone and welcome to the launch of the Green Party's manifesto for the 2010 general election. We go into this general election with more candidates than ever before, over 320 candidates across the country, around half the seats contested. We go into this election with a fully costed manifesto programme, which you'll hear more about from Adrian and Caroline shortly. And we go into this election for the first time ever with real prospects of winning Westminster seats. In Brighton Pavilion, where Caroline's standing, we're now the odds-on favourite. That's actually the first time there's been an odds-on favourite in Brighton Pavilion, because it's been such a highly marginal seat over the years. In Norwich South, we've topped the poll in the last three sets of local elections, where Adrian's standing, and in Lewisham Deptford, we've transformed what was a safe Labour heartland into a key Labour Green battleground and have overturned large Labour majorities in council elections. And we know people ask about a hung parliament, which there's a lot of talk about at the moment. And from our record in local government, in the Scottish Parliament and in the London Assembly, we have punched above our weight. Even a few Green MPs in Westminster can make a big difference. We've proved ourselves in local government, in regional government, and we can make a difference in Westminster. Adrian.
Thank you. Well, one of our key commitments at this election is to protect public services from privatisation, to keep public services local. Green MPs will press to protect post offices and to reopen those post offices that have closed over the last couple of years under the Labour programme. We think that post offices are a vital local service that every local community needs. With education, we want to ensure that all local schools are good schools. We want to end the increasing influence of big business over our schools that we see in the Academy School programme. We want to ensure that teachers are freed up to do their job, to inspire children, that they don't have the burden of formalised tests and huge amounts of paperwork. We support the call of the National Union of Teachers to end SATs tests for younger children. And we want all talented young people to be able to go to university. We have a clear commitment in this manifesto to end tuition fees for students. And on health, Greens want to ensure that money is going into improving our health services rather than into the deep pockets of the private finance companies. Because what we've seen under Labour is huge amounts of money going into private finance hospitals. And we say we want to end PFI and we want to invest in public health for the future. We want to keep local health centres local, where people know their GP rather than having to go to a distant polyclinic. And we want to support local businesses, because local businesses are the bedrock of local economies. They protect jobs, they promote jobs, they sell products that are produced locally. We will reduce corporation tax for small businesses. And we need to ensure as well that banking is a force for good. Banks ought to be strong local services, a key part of their local community. They ought to be a force for good. We want to promote localised banking. We want to promote mutuals, the sorts of good things that we've had in the past, where people's money is safe and where money is invested in genuine local community projects. We've got to learn the lessons from the credit crunch. We've got to break up the big banks. We've got to take advice of people like Mervyn King, who are advising us on that. Green MPs in the next Parliament will protect public services and keep them local. And that's a key part of the manifesto that we're launching today.
Thank you. And party leader and candidate for Brighton Pavilion, Caroline Lucas.
Thanks, Darren, and welcome to this press conference this morning. Well, in our manifesto, we've put economics, the environment and fairness at the very heart. And our overall aim is to set out how to make Britain a greener and much fairer society. Central to our approach is the creation of more jobs. We demonstrate that you don't have to have this false choice between, do we tackle the environment crisis first, do we tackle the economic crisis first? Both of them are massively important. The climate crisis, we know, if we don't tackle it urgently, runs a real risk of running out of control. The economic crisis is clearly causing great hardship right now. But the good news is that there are ways of tackling both of those things at the same time. That's the ideas that we have in the so-called Green New Deal, a massive investment in energy efficiencies, renewable energies, that not only gets our emissions down much more quickly than the other parties would, but which also is a really practical way of getting people back to work, creating hundreds of thousands of new jobs. Alongside our job creation plans are practical policies to move this country to become a much fairer society. The wealth of the top 10% in Britain have wealth 100 times greater than the poorest 10%. We're more unequal now as a society than we have been since any time since just after the Second World War. And I think it is an indictment of a Labour government that after 13 years in power, Britain is now more unequal than it was in 1997. And that's why, in our manifesto, we are making a real pledge to say that fair is worth fighting for, and that's what the Green Party will do. Now is the time for radical tax reform, which will enable us to move to much fairer taxation, with those on very high incomes paying more and those on lower incomes paying much less. Let me just give you a couple of specific pledges. We're pledging today to pay pensioners a citizen's pension of £170 a week. We believe that it is a scandal that 1 in 4 pensioners today lives in poverty, 2.5 million older people. Now, Labour promised 13 years ago that they would link pensions to earnings, and it still hasn't happened. And that figure of £170 a week is calculated as the minimum required to keep basic state pension above the official poverty line and was recommended by the National Pensioners Convention. And a second pledge that we're making is to increase the minimum wage so that it's set at 60% of average earnings. Now, further measures are outlined in our manifesto that will go a long way towards shifting our society to be a much, much fairer one. And that's crucial to us because there is so much evidence to demonstrate that unequal societies aren't only bad for people on the lower end of the spectrum. Unequal societies have much worse health outcomes, crime outcomes, violence outcomes, right across society, wherever you are within that society. So finally, how do we pay for it? This is a costed manifesto based on real redistribution. Some of the proposals we have in it include things like cancelling the enormously wasteful and irresponsible Trident replacement programme, saving up to 80 billion or more over the coming years, shifting the 30 billion roads building programme into public transport instead, introducing a higher rate of income tax at 50% for incomes above £100,000, abolishing the upper limit for national insurance contributions, cracking down on tax havens and other forms of tax evasion and tax avoidance, the so-called Robin Hood tax on international financial transactions, ending huge subsidies on aviation fuel, things like modifying the regime for corporation tax, making tax on bankers' bonuses a permanent tax. Now, it is a set of ambitious proposals, but the Green Party has never been afraid of being ambitious, and we would argue that now is exactly the time when we need that kind of ambitious policy making. Now is exactly the time to be reviewing the economic system that has brought us so close to the brink of collapse. Now is the time to be looking at doing things in a very different way, in a way that will leave the majority better off under our plans, that will leave Britain less socially unequal, and will leave Britain significantly closer to shifting to that sustainable society and economy that we so urgently need. Now, on the deficit, our plans would halve it in the same time period as the government by 2013. But we are the only party out there that is putting forward a different way of doing it, not by throwing hundreds of thousands of people out of work, sharpening our axes to make the savage cuts that all the other parties are so proud of boasting about just so very recently. That, we believe, has a serious risk of the so-called double-dip recession. We recognise that increasing taxation on those who can afford it is a fairer, more effective way forward than cutting the jobs of those who absolutely cannot afford it.